Hi, and welcome back to the second part of this week's lecture. As I mentioned in the first part, this week's lectures are a little bit shorter because I'm giving you some more work to do outside of the lectures. We've been looking at evidence. The first part we talked about why you might need evidence and particularly about assessment for learning. In the second part, we're just going to give a few practical ideas about what that might look like and how you could interpret it. But again, I'm going to leave the same readings and videos at the end for you to follow up. Also, just remember that at the end of this course we have an exam, a take-home exam, and all the questions are going to be based on the stuff in these lectures. So if you're watching it, I'm sure you've probably got an advantage then. So I'm going to be relatively brief here. I'm going to look at ways to gather evidence and then ways of analysing it. So here's some examples of evidence that you might collect in the classroom. And remember from last time, we're talking about evidence as opposed to data. Sorry, I just dropped the button. So some examples of evidence, things that you will already have. You'll have students' work samples in the class. Students will be working on tasks and activities and they'll be making things or writing things or drawing things. You've got those already. They are all evidence of student learning. And you don't have to ask students to do anything extra, you just need to simply collect them or look at them or analyse them in some way. Sometimes you take a photo of it. The second thing is student activity during a task. So you might set them a task to do. While they're doing it, you as a teacher moving around the classroom will see what they're doing, you'll hear what they're saying, and you can engage with them and learn a lot about how their learning's going. There's a lot of evidence just in observing them, what they're doing. And the key there is to look, in a sense, naively at what's actually happening, not what you want to happen or what you think should happen, but what you actually see. And then what you see and hear is evidence of what the students are learning. Because remember, the point of being a teacher is not to teach stuff, it's that students will learn stuff. So the core business, the way of understanding what they're doing is by seeing their work samples or listening and watching what they do. They give you lots of evidence about what they're learning and what they've learned. In classroom dialogue, so sometimes you'll have discussions in the classroom and in those discussions the students will express their ideas. Now when they express their ideas, they might be seeking to clarify them or understand them. That often they talk through things to try and understand it, but it also gives you evidence about what they think and know, what they've learned. Obviously, if you do give a formal assessment, there's all sorts of evidence there about what they've learned. Now, what often happens with us, and I think I've mentioned this before, is when we give students an assessment task, they give us a whole pile of information about their learning. And what we do is go tick, 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 cross, tick, and then write down a number, 8 out of 10 or something like that. And in essence, what we've done is we've thrown away all the useful information they've told us about the learning and reduced it just to a number. So if you get students to do it, let's say a simple test, what I would be doing is looking at it and then trying to see what that tells me about their learning, and in essence what that tells me about my teaching. So if I gave them a test with 4 questions, one about addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, and I saw that most of the kids got the addition and the subtraction one right, about half got the multiplication one correct, but they made the same, many of them made the same mistake, and the division one, no one seemed to understand it because they all had a misconception that it was about something other than what we thought it should be, then that tells me something about how I've taught that and what I need to go back and do. As well as also, if you need to, gives you a result out of 4 or 10 or whatever you need to put in your mark book. So don't throw away the useful information. And by the same token, if you're going to do that level of analysis, don't give them formal tests and assessments too often. Otherwise you can't do anything with it. The other thing that's important is your own perceptions and your professional judgments. So when you're walking around the classroom, how do you think and feel it's going? Make sure that's based on what you can see and hear, not just what you would like to see. And also, once you've finished a lesson, can you reflect upon it? You don't want to just say, oh, that went well. What went well? What worked well? What did the students like and enjoy? What helped them learn something? And what seemed to not hit the right note? because then it helps you modify your teaching next time. So this is all sorts of evidence that you already have. You don't have to suddenly set up some specific thing to do it. Now, sometimes you can get evidence by capturing practice. What I mean by that is come and watch each other, if you can, or video your class, or audio tape your class. It's not that hard to set up a little GoPro at the back of the room and then just video it, and then see if you can watch it afterwards. It'll give you really interesting insights about what's happening in your classroom. And I've done this before with my own teaching, and I was surprised about what some of the students were doing when I thought they were on task and doing something quite useful. It doesn't have to be long and complex, but just gives you some clear evidence about what's happening. You can also video or audio tape a group of students working on a task. So if you've got 5 groups in your class working on something, you can't be around all of them, but you can get them, just put a camera over it or an audio recorder and listen back to it. You'll hear what they're talking about, what they're saying, the language they're using, and it'll give you a lot of insight and a lot of evidence about what's happening and therefore what you could do. You can also ask kids a question. One of the ones I like to do, not very often, but sometimes, so it keeps its impact, is just at the end of the lesson say to the kids, right, in the last 2 minutes, I want you to write down the most important thing you think you learned today. And that'll give you a really clear indication about what they think is important from the experience they've had over the last hour or so. And again, sometimes you'll be surprised about what they come up with. So that's evidence, first of all, that you already have, and this is some evidence that's relatively easy to capture around what's already happening. It's not like a special event. Now, very occasionally, and I'm saying here no more than once a term, you might design a specifically task or evidence collection thing, an activity. So you might give them a little survey or something. It doesn't have to be complicated. It certainly should be short and quick because the students are there to learn and you want them to spend most of the time on that. So you might just give them a survey after 4 weeks of doing maths, and so it might say, what's the thing you enjoy the most about maths? What would help you learn maths better? What do you find hard? Or just 3 simple questions, and get them to give you some quick feedback on how they think they're going. When they give it to you, remember, it doesn't mean it's always true. Sometimes they'll try and tell you what they think you want to hear. Sometimes they'll take it as a chance to tell you that they hate maths or they love maths or something else. But it does give you some insights. But I don't think you need to do it very often. So that's just some examples of evidence you might collect while you're teaching or occasionally around your teaching. All of it is designed to help you understand what's going on in the class so you can do a better job of teaching them. It's not necessarily about formal assessment for reporting or anything like that. Now here's an example of something you could do. You might be working on the idea of a half, and you might give the students triangle and ask them to draw a line, so to cut it in half. Now if you just give them that, the evidence you get from that would be, oh yeah, the student understands a half. But in essence, that's it's probably not enough. I would also give them this one. Now if they understand the concept of a half, then they would draw the line, in this case, horizontally. But you can see here, this student clearly doesn't understand, so there's some evidence about learning about a half. What does it tell you? They think half is just about chopping it into 2 pieces. And if you only give them an example where chopping it into 2 pieces in the logical place works, then you won't understand whether they really get the idea of a half. So with the second question there, that helps me understand their learning about the concept of a half and would help me then plan my teaching to fix this concept up. If I just did this in a formal assessment, then it's too late because I would have moved on to something else. Whereas this evidence helps me design my teaching. It's not something you necessarily do in a test, something you could see them do in a task or an activity, and then you would modify your teaching probably straight afterwards to help them understand it. Simple, but you can see how the second part was really important to help give evidence about what they're learning. Here's another example. The teacher might ask, what is a factor? And the student response might be, and this is one I've had before, factor times factor equals multiple. Now, from that, the question would be, well, what do they know? Okay, that's their response. Technically, it's a correct response. But if students said that, what do they know? Well, what can they do? So when I heard that from a student, I thought, oh, okay, they've memorized the textbook definition, but do they really understand what it is? So what would you do if a student said that? What's within their zone of proximal development? Where do they need, spelt N-E-D-D, to go next? If a student said that to you, what feedback how can you get them there? What feedback do you need to give them? What's the next task, or what's the next question, or a prompt, or a hint, or a challenge? Now, of course, all the answers to all those questions will depend probably on the child who's giving you this answer. In the example I showed you, this was a student who was a very competent math student, but they were very good at learning the algorithms and the formulas and the definitions and repeating it back. I think their conceptual understanding wasn't very good. So then where did they need to go next? Well, I needed to see if they really understood what it meant. So I asked them, can you give me an example? I asked them, what do you mean by multiple? Can you give me an example? So often students would struggle to explain it in words, but they might be able to give an example. And then if you give an example, you can say, well, why is that a factor? But again, it depends on which student you're talking to. This is just another example of a simple question that yields some evidence to then help us understand their learning, what they've learned. So again, here's the two videos I mentioned in the first part of the lecture this week for you to follow up. I really hope you get a chance to look at them. And here's the two readings from the library. You can find they're both available electronically, so you don't even have to go to the building. Please follow it up, have a read, have a think about it. Not just thinking about it as interesting ideas, but think about it for yourself as someone who's going to be a teacher of mathematics when you go on prac next time, and for your next 30 or how many years you are as a teacher. Okay, all the best.